Okay, Guten Morgen. So I've had the opportunity to take a look at Mr. Sheldon's show where he had Mr. Hood, okay, talking about the recent meeting that the DPP and the police had concerning the death of two individuals, which they basically said that the cases are closed for now in terms of based on their investigation. So for the benefit of my audience, I'd like to take a little look and add a little more clarity to this situation. Okay? Now, first and foremost, I want you to understand that in any system, especially in systems of law, okay, that there's always a sort of check and balance. Okay? Because there's always a possibility for corruption in these matters. So the law and the people who design the law, okay, and the Constitution is there to actually ensure that there is the least amount of corruption possible, okay? And the actual checks and balances within the system to try to ensure that that is the case. So for example, there is what you call a coroner's inquest. And anyone, you don't have to take my word for it, can do their own research, go on the internet and check out what is a coroner's inquest. Now take a look at what Google says about the coroner's inquest as it relates to Grenada. So remember, at any time you can pause the video, okay, to actually read the text, okay? And as you can see, Google basically says that a coroner's inquest is required when there is a sudden, violent, and suspicious death. That is what Google says. That is the law. Okay? That is what is required by a coroner when these circumstances exist. Sudden, violent, or suspicious death. And by any measure, okay, I think most people would conclude that the deaths of these two young men actually meet the requirements of either sudden, violent, or suspicious. Okay, at minimum. And it says that a coroner's inquest must be held under those circumstances. And it goes on to tell us who are the coroners. The coroners are the designated magistrates of the district in which the death occurred. So then the duties upon the coroner, okay, to identify the death, okay? And secondly, to identify the cause or circumstances leading to the death. That is their duty as prescribed and required by law. Let's go on. So here you would have seen that it is mandatory. It is a must. It is required. It shall be. Okay? That the coroner's inquest has to occur under circumstances of sudden, violent, and suspicious deaths. Even if you didn't have violence in this case, or you believe you didn't have violence, or even if you believe that these deaths weren't suspicious, okay, then the sudden requirement would have been met because these are young, relatively healthy men, okay? So for them having died suddenly, this in itself, just by itself, sudden, would have required a coroner's inquest. Okay? And it goes on to say, and it goes on to speak to the power, real power of a coroner. The coroner has the ability, okay, to summon witnesses. They can require postmortems. And the coroners can compel, okay, production of evidence. Now, these are very strong words. These are not maybe. These are shall words and compel production of evidence, okay? And they even talk about certain circumstances when people die while being in state custody, okay? That definitely a coroner's inquest is required, as we may know about the recent Bartholomew case, okay? And there's a reason why these things are required, okay? And specifically, the case when they die in state's custody, you can have a jury of 5. Okay? But you have to understand that in a coroner's court, it is not necessary to have a jury. Okay? You can have proceedings without a jury. But they specified in this particular case, okay, where someone dies while being in the state's custody, then a jury of 5 is required. Okay? Let's go on. And because of all this power and oversight and check and balance, okay, that is sort of placed in the hands of a coroner, is why I was extremely appalled and surprised, okay, when Mr. Randall Robinson went on his social media platform, okay, when they announced that a coroner's inquest was going to take place, and he said to the effect that, oh, don't worry, no one is criminally convicted. No one is criminally convicted in a coroner's inquest. Why that may be the case, the coroner has the ability to indict. So I do not understand why the gentleman would have believed that it was wise in a politically charged case, okay, where there's suspicions flying all over the place, that he thought that it was wise to come, especially being such a high member in the upper echelons of NDC, to come in a public platform and in some respects to say, oh, don't worry, there's nothing here to see, because no one is criminally convicted in a coroner's inquest. So the question is begged, why would you have wanted to do that, Mr. Randall Robinson? Some may say, as some may see this as trying to persuade or to taint public opinion on the issue. It would have been ill-advised for you to have done something like that. And that is exactly why I took the gentleman to task when I saw that he did that on Facebook. And here you would have seen the Coroner's Act goes on to tell you who is the chief coroner. It says the Chief Justice, okay, ex officio, okay? That means by the very nature of his position, by being in that position, is the chief coroner, okay? And it says that when the Chief Justice is not around, okay, the registrar of the Supreme Court may fill that role, or anyone appointed by the Governor General, which he sees fit in his opinion. And of course, I'm meaning here, his or her opinion. It goes on to tell you who are the district coroners. And it says that the magistrates, again, by ex officio, by the very nature of their position, by the very presence of their position, is the coroner within the districts which they oversee. Okay? So the magistrates of the districts are the coroners of that district. Let's go on. So I hope you've seen what Section 5 says. It says that in addition, the Governor General may hire a deputy for the coroner, okay, that he or she seems as fit. And the coroner themselves can hire a deputy, and they both have the power to dismiss as they see fit, okay? And as is said in the document, that the hired assistant coroner or deputy will have the powers of the justice of the peace, okay? Let's move on. So this section, section 10 that we just looked at, is extremely critical. And there it is where you might have heard Mr. Hood said that there might have been, okay, some sort of incompetence on behalf of certain people, okay? and there may have been negligence. Okay? And that is his concern. So let's look at section 10. So it says, under sudden death, okay, that it shall be the duty. Important here is the word shall. There's no way you can get away from that. It's not maybe or somehow, but it shall. That is an imperative. That is a command. That is a must. There shall be duty of the coroner to investigate the cause of death. And if necessary, have an inquest. So once there's a sudden death in the district of the coroner, they have a duty. It is imperative. They are compelled to find out what is the cause of death. And if necessary, I am assuming here that if immediately the cause of death cannot be concluded or figured out what was the reason, then the coroner should have an inquest. So it is, we establish the duty of the coroner, okay, to find out the cause of death of anyone that dies suddenly within the district. And here comes the part about discretion of the coroner. And if necessary, okay, hold an inquest. And what are the circumstances? Okay, any sudden death. Then they also talk about if there's a death that there is cause to suspect that that death was occasioned by violence or an accident. Okay? Then the coroner has a duty to find out the cause of death and, if necessary, hold an inquest. But it doesn't stop there, because it says, the law clearly states that if you have a sudden death and the cause is unknown, if the cause is unknown, then that falls under the jurisdiction of section 10. Okay? So then, if the cause is unknown, the coroner has an obligation. So if the cause of death is unknown, the coroner has an obligation, okay, to inquire into the circumstances of the death or the cause of death. And if necessary, hold an inquest. But all of this depends on the coroner being informed that there was a sudden death. Okay? And the law, at the right towards the bottom, the law is clear. So it is, we establish the duty of the coroner, okay, to find out the cause of death of anyone that dies suddenly within the district. And here comes the part about discretion of the coroner. And if necessary, okay, hold an inquest. And what are the circumstances? Okay, any sudden death. Then they also talk about if there's a death that there is cause to suspect that that death was occasioned by violence or an accident. Okay? Then the coroner has a duty to find out the cause of death and, if necessary, hold an inquest. But it doesn't stop there, because it says, the law clearly states that if you have a sudden death and the cause is unknown, if the cause is unknown, then that falls under the jurisdiction of section 10. Okay? So then, if the cause is unknown, the coroner has an obligation. So if the cause of death is unknown, the coroner has an obligation, okay, to inquire into the circumstances of the death or the cause of death. And if necessary, hold an inquest. But all of this depends on the coroner being informed that there was a sudden death. Okay? And the law, at the right towards the bottom, the law is clear. So when the death occurs under those particular circumstances that we mentioned before, or aforementioned, it says again, imperative again, that the constables, okay, and of course that's how the British say it when they're talking about the police force. The constables have an obligation, and they shall report it to the coroner, in addition to public institutions and estates, the household of the person. Okay? There shall, and this is not just a regular shall, it shall at once. So this talks about the urgency with which this report should be done or handed to the coroner. Okay? This talk about the immediacy of how such a situation or such a death should be handled. Okay? It basically should be immediately, at once, reported to the coroner. And then the coroner would decide to inquire into the cause of death and, if necessary, hold an inquest. And I think part of Mr. Hood's contention is whether or not that was done. And he might have claimed, I believe, in his discussion with Sheldon, that that was not done. So again, there's a sense of, was there negligence in not doing that? Was there incompetence in not doing that? Because this does not say, okay, you should continue your investigation, and then when you feel like, then report to the coroner. This says that when this happens, you shall at once report it to the coroner. And I believe that the law is so structured because they don't want time to pass to taint, okay, or to affect any material evidence that may be associated with the particular debt. So I hope you have carefully read section 11 and 12, because they're saying, the law is clearly saying, that after the coroner receives that report of the debt in the district, the coroner has to go about investigating the cause of the debt. Okay? Under his, and the police will be acting or assisting under his or her direction. Not the other way around. The coroner is the lead on this investigation. So there are other parts of the law that speaks to, irrespective of what the police does, the coroner leads his or her own investigation to determine the cause or manner or circumstances of the debt. Okay? If the debt or the circumstances of the debt is sufficiently apparent, then the coroner does not proceed with an inquest. Okay? The coroner can also require the body be seen, okay, by a medical examiner, or to assist in determining the cause and manner of death. So the coroner in this case has much leverage, okay, in going about investigating the cause and manner of death. They can require a medical examiner to take a look at the body, even if a postmortem was done. That is the independence and the extensive powers of the coroner. And when all of this investigation is done, the coroner files a report and forwards it forthwith to the Chief Justice. That is the power of the coroner. Okay? So I think one of the issues Mr. Hood keep bringing up about this whole situation is that he might have felt that that information was not passed on to the coroner so that the coroner can act. Okay? That is one of his contentions, I believe. And he might have mentioned that he actually wrote to the magistrate of the district, okay? And the magistrate, in some respects, responded and implicated his or herself that he or she did not receive any report from the constables. And we're talking about, of course, the police force here. And I'm talking about, in particular, Mr. Franklyn's situation, because he said he's not really dealing with the other situation. He has not been retained to deal with the other situation. But what it seems, based on conversation in a public space, that the situations might be similar in the way the other debt with Mr. Frederick was handled. So the question, was this some sort of oversight? Was there a procedural error? I think, if you're related to these people who have passed, you definitely will have those concerns and would like those concerns resolved. Not just in the interest of the people who passed. Of course, the family will be upset. But overall, to hope, that this is not standard operating procedure. And if it is, to ensure that it is ultimately changed and the law is followed. Because in this case here, people can afford to hire a lawyer to take a look at this. But what happens to the people, the regular man and woman in Grenada, who end up in situations where things are done to them or happen to them, and then no one comes forward or has the ability or the money to hire a lawyer to take a look into it? You see the problem? So again, the coroner has extensive, power and authority to investigate the cause and circumstances of a particular death that is deemed sudden, suspicious, or unknown. Again, you see another term in law, forthwith, that points to or speaks to the immediacy, the urgency of dealing with the situation. And I can understand, for many of you who like, criminology and crime and stuff like that, and you look at the first 48, and you would hear that these people tell you that your success in solving a crime, and I'm not saying in any way that a crime was committed yet, but your success depends on what you do in the first 48 hours of the incident. So I believe that is why these things are put into law, just in case, if there was some sort of crime, that there was some sort of act of violence involved in the death of that body. And there you see in section 32 that the law says that this sort of court is not an open court. And for very good reasons. Such that the coroner can deny presence to any person that he or she deems so. And of course, you have to understand, there's a reason why probably you wouldn't want certain information to be let out or to be exposed, to certain individuals or people or institutions. It's a way of maintaining the integrity, and careful thought and consideration of the matter. And that is why I believe that many people are confused with the process that took place concerning the deaths of these two gentlemen. Now you see a situation where the police is taking the lead, having press conferences, the DPP is having press conferences, and again, it seems confusing. In such a situation, many people seem confused as to why that the police seem to be the ones, or the DPP seem to be the ones, actually requiring an inquest. When this is something that should have been in the hands of the magistrate of the district, who is the coroner. You would think that in such a situation, that the coroner would take the lead. And if the coroner so desires that the police and the DPP be present, then that is at his or her discretion. So I believe that is why you see Mr. Hood himself, being thoroughly familiar with the law, is a bit confused about what is taking place. And is actually calling, you saw, he called for the resignation of the DPP. Because he felt somehow that the DPP is not intimately familiar with the law enough to serve in the position he's serving. His words, not mine. And I believe Mr. Cajeton Hood is in a better position to judge these matters than I am. Again, and here you see in section 32, the extensive powers of the coroner, because the coroner, at his or her discretion, can allow the family members to partake in this closed courtroom, or anyone else at the coroner's discretion. The coroner can also allow these people's lawyers to be present. Okay? That's the power of the coroner. So when you see, I mean, it's kind of, again, it's confusing. I would understand why Mr. Cajeton Hood would be confused, that it seems that the police in this case, the constables and the DPP are taking the lead on this particular case. So people are concerned that the independence of the coroner may be in some respects compromised, especially if the coroner decides to have a jury. And above all, especially seeing that there was some sort of recommendation from the prosecutor, from the police, as for an inquest. I believe that many people would think that they should leave this alone at this stage, unless called upon by the coroner. It's pretty much in the hands of the coroner now to act. If the constables believe what they believe, and they said there's nothing here to see, then it's up to the coroner to do what they should have done from the inception of this whole situation. No! So now the coroner, if the coroner decides that there is some more medical investigation required, then guess what? The gentleman's body would have to be exhumed. Now I hope again you have thoroughly read section 35, because again it speaks to the power, okay, extensive power of the coroner. So in that court, that closed court that the coroner would have had, if a verdict came back of manslaughter, okay, or whatever verdict came back, guess what? Then it is lawful, means that it should be done, okay, based on law, that the DPP should file charges against that individual and may continue to collect additional evidence. But just on the depositions given in the closed court, the DPP can file charges against the individual who was, in some respects, indicted in that closed court. That is the power of a coroner's inquest. And if the DPP doesn't act, then charges, okay, can be filed just upon the inquisition. And that is why you might have seen Mr. Cajeton Hood spoke and was concerned about the actions of the DPP. Because as he rightfully said, the DPP's function is more so prosecutorial rather than investigative. They can make recommendations for investigation, but the prosecutor is not the investigator. Okay? Their function is more prosecutorial. Based on evidence, based on investigation, they can proceed to prosecution. That is why you saw Mr. Cajeton Hood was very concerned by the actions of the DPP. And I believe that the DPP should be intimately familiar with the law. So again, I hope you have paused the video and read exactly what Section 38 of Grenada's Coroners Act says. It is specific. It says that if anyone who dies in the circumstances we talked about, sudden, suspicious, unknown, it says that the body cannot be buried unless an order is received from the coroner. Now, this is serious business. So the question here is, was an order received from the coroner to bury the body? And there are consequences to anyone who would have buried the body. Summary conviction and a fine of $1,000. There's serious concerns here. And as I hinted earlier, that the coroner may order an exhumation. Okay? The coroner may order an exhumation of the body. If the body was buried without that order from the coroner may order that that body be exhumed. And even if there was an inquest and it was felt that it was insufficient, the coroner can still order an exhumation of the body. Again, this is what I am telling you. This is the extensive power of the coroner. And this is interesting. This is how serious the laws of Grenada take this whole matter. That it even goes on to say in section 39 that that exhumation, okay, would have, and reinterment would have to be paid for by the consolidated funds. This is how serious this is. And it says the exhumation would not take place only if it is a serious threat to public health or there is a limited probability that additional information will be garnered that would shed light on the cause or manner of death. This is serious business. So here it is, consequences for neglect of duty, okay, or refusal to perform duties, okay. Section 42, 43, and 44 talks about consequences for not performing the duties as prescribed by law. The coroner who neglects to perform such a duty shall, on conviction on indictment, be fined $5,000. The people responsible for informing the coroner who neglect to do their duty shall, on summary conviction, be required to pay $1,000. Jurors that have been summoned and neglect or refuse to take part in the court shall also be fined $1,000. So there is consequences for these lack of action. I believe the state takes this very seriously. And here you see further consequences, okay, for obstructing the view or the inquiry of the coroner or his or her jurors or his or her jury. There's consequences for that. There's consequences for in any way obstructing the coroner. There's consequences for obstructing the medical practitioner in the process of his or her duties connected to the case. There is consequences for obstructing any exhumation of the body. There's consequences. And for those actions, you would be liable on summary conviction with a fine of $2,500. And then it talks about matters in the court for obstruction in the court or misbehavior in the court. The coroner has the power to send you to jail for a maximum 14 days or have you pay a fine of $100. Again, that is at the discretion of the coroner. So the bottom line is this. The law is clear and the law testifies to the extensive power of a coroner. Okay? That in some respects supersedes that of the constables and the DPP, and is distinct and separate. And irrespective of what the DPP does or the constables do, the coroner has the power to have an inquest regardless. This is the check and balance in the system. And it's critical that that sort of check and balance be followed if we are to have a healthy, structured, and respectable society. So I have a strange feeling that none of this is going to go away in the short term. Diesem Zimmer. Guten Tag.
The highly anticipated Maroon Economics drop is officially live, and we need you to help us settle a debate. Both tees feature our exclusive cultural artwork, blending rich heritage with the fresh streetwear vibe. They both look incredible, but you have to make a choice. So, which one are you taking? The sleek black or the crisp white? Drop your choice in the comments below right now.
Welcome to the front lines of empowerment with Honovi Global Network. We aren't just creating content, we are sparkling a global awakening. Our foundation is built on 3 unbreakable pillars: awareness, education, and liberation. It is time to unlock your ultimate potential and join a community that demands truth. Every message is designed to challenge the status quo. But to keep this powerful movement growing, we need your energy. And now there is a brand new way to proudly show your support. Introducing the exclusive Honovi Global Network merch drop, brought to you in a powerful collaboration with Caribbean Issues. From crisp polos to bold caps and beanies, this is premium gear with a real purpose. Head over to the Caribbean Issues store today. Every single purchase you make directly supports our work on the network. Your style fuels our mission. Stand with us, grab your merch, and let's change the game together.